All right, today we're going to talk about one of the weirdest, but also one of the most incredible survival strategies in the entire animal kingdom. It belongs to the hornbill. Seriously, this is a story about self-imprisonment, extreme vulnerability, and a set of biological superpowers that, honestly, we're only just starting to wrap our heads around. Okay, let's get into it.
So this is the big question, right? Why would any animal, especially a bird that can fly, choose to lock itself away every single breeding season? The female hornbill does just that. It seems to make no sense at all. Now, the simple answer is, to protect herself and her eggs from predators. But what actually happens inside that little prison? Well, that's where the story gets really, really interesting.
And I mean, she really seals herself in. She uses this cocktail of mud, her own feces, and leftover food to build a literal wall, closing up the entrance to a hollow tree. All she leaves is this tiny little vertical slit. It's just big enough for her mate to pass food through and for her to, toss out the garbage. She is completely and utterly trapped. And this is where two massive biological mysteries begin.
Okay, let's dive into mystery number 1, which I'm calling a total feather failure. Because almost as soon as she's sealed that door, she takes a huge gamble that leaves her completely, and I mean completely, helpless. That's right. While she's sealed in the dark, she does something called a simultaneous molt. She just drops every single flight feather from her wings and her tail all at the same time. For a bird, this is about as vulnerable as it gets. She can't fly. If a predator breaks in or something happens to her mate, there's no escape plan. So what on earth would trigger such a risky, dramatic move?
Well, for almost a century, the going theory was pretty simple. An ornithologist named C.R. Stoner suggested way back in 1937 that the sudden darkness of the nest must be the trigger. And you know what? It made sense. It was a neat idea that got repeated in textbooks for over 80 years. But here's the catch. Nobody had ever actually tested it.
So fast forward to today, and some researchers decided to finally put this old idea to the test. They had a hunch it was wrong, because they noticed that the females didn't start molting right away. It seemed to happen only after they had finished laying all their eggs. So they had a new theory. Maybe the trigger wasn't darkness, but something hormonal, something internal, that fired off once the clutch was complete.
And here's the brilliant way they tested it. They set up two kinds of nest boxes. You had your traditional dark wooden ones, and then you had these translucent plastic ones that let in a lot more light. So what happened? Well, you can see the data right here. It turns out the amount of light made no difference whatsoever. Females in the bright boxes molted all at once, just like the ones in the dark. Just like that, an 80-year-old theory was busted. The trigger isn't the darkness outside, it's something happening inside her body.
Okay, so we've solved one mystery. It's not the darkness. But, being flightless is only half the battle. This brings us to mystery number 2, the absolutely brutal environment the female has to endure. Basically, life inside a sauna. This graph does a fantastic job of showing what it's like in there. Look, the top line shows the air temperature inside the nest is pretty similar to the hot Kalahari Desert outside. But check out that second graph. It's showing humidity. And wow, inside that nest, the air is incredibly humid. We're talking almost 100%. This is a huge, huge problem if you're trying to stay cool. It's like being in a steam room. You know how it's hard to cool off when the air is already full of water? Your main cooling mechanism, evaporation, like panting for a bird, just doesn't work as well.
So now we have our second huge question. This bird is trapped, she can't fly, and she's living in a natural sauna where it's almost impossible to cool down normally. How does she not just overheat and die in there? Well, the answer, it turns out, is a hidden superpower. So, how does she pull it off? This is the big reveal. Let's call them his and hers heat hacks, because it all comes down to a really stunning and kind of hidden difference between how male and female hornbills are wired to handle extreme heat.
Yep. Scientists hooked them up to instruments and measured their physiology under serious heat stress. And what they found was amazing. When the temperature gets over 40 degrees Celsius, that's about 104 Fahrenheit, the females suddenly become way more efficient at handling the heat than the males are.
Let's start with water. In that crazy heat, females lose 17% less water through evaporation than males do. Now, 17% might not sound like a ton, but in a desert, when every single drop of water has to be brought to you by your partner, that level of water conservation is an absolute lifesaver.
And it's not just water, they're also way more energy efficient. To stay cool in those same scorching temperatures, females burn 13% less metabolic energy than the males. They're essentially running a much more efficient internal air conditioner,
It's incredible. So let's just put this all together. The female hornbill has basically evolved to become a master of efficiency when things get hot. She saves more water, she uses less energy, and she does all this to achieve the exact same goal as the male, keeping her body from overheating. She is perfectly, I mean perfectly adapted for this insane, self-imposed confinement. It's an evolutionary masterclass.
But here's the twist. This incredible, super specialized adaptation, well, it comes with a very big, very modern risk.
Think about it. Evolution has built her to survive right on the very edge of what's physically possible. But her entire strategy depends on the male, who's out there in the heat, using his less efficient body to find food and water for the whole family. So, in a world that's getting hotter and hotter, what happens when it becomes too much even for him?
And the consequences are pretty grim. Research is already showing that as temperatures climb, the males really struggle to find enough food. This leads to what scientists call sublethal fitness costs, which basically means the nests start to fail. The female might get so desperate she abandons the nest, even though she can't fly. And the chicks that do manage to survive are often smaller and weaker. The very strategy that ensured their survival for so long might now be threatening their future, raising fears of serious population declines.
And that leaves us with this final, really important question. The hornbill's whole reproductive life is a masterpiece of evolution, fine-tuned over countless generations to solve a very specific set of problems. But what happens when the rules of the environment change faster than evolution can keep up? Can a perfect specialization actually become a fatal flaw? It's a question that we have to ask not just for the hornbill, but for so many other specialist species all across our warming planet.